can't forget the day we met. Your eyes so blue, me piercing through. I can't forget the day we met. Your smile so bright, it made me swoon. Our love is like a summer's day, hot and endless in a magic way. Whenever I see you.
Hi everybody, just a quick reminder before we get started that the following broadcast is copyright 2020, Titus Nietzsche Anderson and Sopratutto. I have no partners, I have no co-authors, and I have no redistributors. I do not work for the United States of America, and I do not work for any branches of Hollywood, meaning the Screen Actors Guild, Producers Guild, etc. What is up, everybody? This is Titus Nietzsche Anderson for the Sopratutto podcast. Today is July the 12th, 2020. The title of our talk for this week is going to be Intelligenze, Sopratutto, and the New World Order. Okay, so as you guys may know, in the past I have said that the purpose of Sopratutto is not to work as a platform against white supremacy. However, the subject material is coming up increasingly often, and that is due to my own personal circumstances, as well as our contemporary media attempting to address problems like climate change, lethal autonomous weapons, and things like that without addressing white supremacy. And I've mentioned before that if you're not addressing white supremacy, then you're not addressing those problems. So one day, a couple of years ago, I was at the Los Angeles Public Library, and I was looking for a desk where I could have a seat. And when I found one, there was 3 or 4 books already at this desk. And one of them was a small thin book on the subject of white supremacy. And what I had learned that day kind of surprised me. It turns out that white supremacy is a byproduct of a certain time period. The idea of white supremacy is a byproduct of a certain time period. It wasn't an ideal, it wasn't a religion, it wasn't a goal or something like that. You didn't have to take a gun and put it to an African American's head to establish white supremacy. White supremacy was born of the late 19th century after Europeans had gone on a terrifying and prodigious run creatively. It really changes and alters the course of our Earth. And so what I decided to do was to take a look at this window of time that creates the very foundations for which white supremacy is built upon. So what happens is if you take a look at the history of inventions, in the 17th century, there were 10 significant inventions. In the 18th century, there were 33 significant inventions. And in the 19th century, we get 98 significant inventions. Our Earth will never be the same because of this 19th century. And the inventions are simply fantastic. We get canned foods from that time period. We get the printing press from that time period. We get the sewing machine. We get scales that weigh you. We get the cinematograph for movies and things like that. But perhaps more strikingly, we get some other inventions that will forever affect our world in some pretty controversial ways. In 1876, we get the petrol engine by Nicholas August Otto. In 1886, that turns into the automobile by Carl Benz, as he creates the Benz motor wagon or people wagon. In the 1700s, we have coal mining, with Great Britain responsible for 5/6 of the total amount of coal mining. But to its credit, it closed all of its mines in the year 2015. The television sets between the years of 1880 and 1927 have probably 3 or 4 dozen different people who work on it until you see its final version that you're most familiar with around the year 1927. And that would be the black and white television set that was in most Americans' homes at that time. During the 1700s, the warship was created, a warship that no longer needed wood. Although warships have been around for hundreds of years, prior to this time period, warships actually took on a substantial significance and is the very foundation for the notion of white supremacy. Because of Germany's dominance over the seas, this is where they get their first postulation and notion that they must not have any equals, or they supposed that they did not have any equals to be found anywhere in the world. In the year 1804, you get the steam locomotive that was created by Richard Leviathan. And in the year 1862, you have plastics that were created by Alexander Parks. In the year 1856, synthetic dyes come along. The dyes that color your blue jeans blue and your sweaters red. Those were created by William H. Perkins. In the year 1859, the rechargeable battery was created. That becomes the precursor to things like the Duracell battery that you use in all of your electronics. In the year 1876, Alexander Graham Bell creates the telephone. In the year 1824, Johann von Drais creates the bolt-action rifle. Although rifles have been around since the 15th century, it's not until 1824 that you have the bolt-action rifle, which to the best of my knowledge means that you have a bullet in a chamber instead of the musket type of rifle. In the areas of thought and philosophy, some names will be here forever, like Kant and Darwin, Lamarck, Smith, Hayek, Hume, Marx, and Nietzsche have forever changed philosophy. And there's good reason for that, because of the imperialism, socialism, Darwinism, nationalism, colonialism, and other things that are being analyzed, including free trade, slave trade, and things like that. So as you can see, because of this window of time, it's approximately 150 years. It is a phenomenal creative time period. However, it also has a dark side. And the dark side cannot be ignored. What looks like a blessing just may turn out to be mankind's greatest curse of all time. From the textiles that dye your blue jeans blue and your sweaters red, there's a terrible amount of water used to dye just one pair of blue jeans. It requires pesticides on the cotton. It emits greenhouse gases, and the nylon and polyesters take decades to decompose. the bleaching and the dyeing and the surfactants to get the dye into the cotton damages the environment and the water when it's released back into the drains. Damage from oil, turning crude into petrochemicals, releases toxins into the environment. As everybody knows, it contributes to the CO2. And then there's the oil spills from motors and engines that leaks its way into the ocean. Fracking for natural gas, although it doesn't create the same amount of CO2 emissions, it leaves a lot of chemicals behind in the earth, which finds its way into different water wells and plant life. The cruise ships that were such a big accomplishment for the Germans and allowed them to attain supremacy over the seas are the #1 cause of pollution on the earth. In fact, cruise ships emit sewage, gray water, oily bilge, ballast, and solid waste, and the CO2 emissions are larger for one cruise ship per day on the ocean than 1 million automobiles. That means a Carnival cruise ship that can hold no more than 1,776 people for a day will put more waste out there than 1 million automobiles in America. In fact, if you take all of the cruise ships that are on the ocean right now, they are emitting more greenhouse gases and waste than all of the homes and all of the cars sitting on the continental United States of America right now. Plastics that we've come to be familiar with can survive thousands of years in water. We left 360 million tons of it behind in the year 2018. It's so pervasive that almost every man, woman, and child in industrial areas has some traceable plastics in their bodies. The rechargeable batteries like Duracell and so forth that you use for your electronics are leaking into the ocean and poisoning the soil. The bolt-action rifles that are being used for warfare, I couldn't even get a good read or a number for the number of deaths caused because of the bolt-action rifle, which turned into the AK-47 rifle. We have handguns, and then there's the semi-automatic weapons that also came along later. When it comes to the automobile, it is the number two cause of pollution, and I couldn't find any accurate numbers or records for that either, as far as what type of harm the automobile is causing. The television set that everybody uses is a source of misinformation for the news. It sells a lot of crap to eat, and the soap operas that play on it are usually bad examples of maturity and problem solving. That doesn't stop us from watching it, however. If you take 1 hour and you multiply that by 7 billion people, and you multiply that times 365 days, you get 2.5 trillion. But the average person doesn't spend 1 hour a day watching television. The average person spends about 3 hours a day watching television. That means we are losing 7.5 trillion hours a year watching bad influences, bad examples, getting misinformed on the daily news, and being sold a lot of cheap crap to eat. Airplanes, I couldn't get an accurate number for that as far as the pollution and damages caused. And then, of course, there is the contemporary warfare for oil. Now, warfare has changed over the years, and There's a gentleman by the name of Leif Winnar who has studied this extensively. And according to him, that our oil, which is sourced through an artery that cuts through the earth, it starts around Russia, and then it winds through the Middle East, and it goes to North Africa, and then to South America. That if you study those countries, you will find oppressive governments, grand corruption, and civil conflict. And that there are also 6 major correlates with oil-rich countries. Number 1, they are more likely to have an authoritarian regime. Number 2, they're more likely to be engaged in civil war. Number 3, they're more likely to have grand corruption. Number 4, they're more likely to have people who are starved of food. 5, they are more likely to have people there who live in poverty. And number 6, they are more likely to have refugees fleeing those countries. And that gentleman's name is Leif Winnar, L-E-I-F, Winnar, W-E-N-A-R, in case you want to research that for yourself. With regards to philosophy, for the same time period, that mid-1800s area, well, instead of talking about Kant and Darwin and Lamarck and Karl Marx and Friedrich Nietzsche and so forth, we start talking about people like Aleister Crowley, L. Ron Hubbard, Madame Blavatsky, Himmler, Horkheimer, Ragnar Redbeard, and so forth. Now, that may sound hilarious to you, but think about this. When our children and our families sit down to watch Netflix, whose ideas do you think are more likely to be written into a 90-minute movie that you're watching? L. Ron Hubbard or John Stuart Mill? Ragnar Redbeard or Karl Marx? There's no contest. It's definitely the occult philosophers that we're spending 7.5 trillion hours of our lives watching. They're the ones whose ideas are more likely to end up in your contemporary movies, TV shows, and cable, and things like that. And their ideas are not good. It's usually just a variation on colonialism, imperialism, and the rationalizations for it. So what do you guys think? Are you impressed with the foundations of white supremacy? The innovations were wonderful. However, because of the 19th century, our Earth now has a potential expiration date. Everybody has a gun or a rifle or access to one. There are more wars raging today than there were 100 years ago, despite the fact that we have better agriculture, access to education, trillions of new dollars, the ability to travel, the ability to speak to people using the same language, the ability to eliminate religious barriers, cultural barriers, and geographical barriers. Because of the 19th century and its innovations, we all have plastics in our bodies and in our food. And because of the 19th century, there is climate change and people are migrating and moving all over the world. Because of the 19th century, we have a lot of cheap food and soybean products to eat, and the most impressionable people in the world are spending 7.5 trillion hours getting us educated on how to think and behave themselves by watching television. They're also stunting their educational growth and emotional maturity by doing that. Because of the 19th century, ideas like might is right, being special over others is always going to be taught. The occult ideas are going to be everywhere. And those things are just not going to be going anywhere. I'm sorry about that. I got distracted there for a second. So that's my take on it. I mean, whether this stuff is justifiable to you or not probably depends on who you are and where you are at the time of these things occurring. Is it worth it? Probably not. Is it moral? Definitely not. Is it necessary? Well, we wouldn't want to put these inventions back, but scaling them back voluntarily is absolutely necessary. In fact, that is the title of the talk for today. It's Intelligenze, Sopratutto, and the New World Order. Some people say that all of our wars are actually over oil, not the differences among us. So, population control, warfare, food and work shortages, these things have happened before, and they're probably going to continue as well as being recurring all over the place. All right, on other subject material, one of the latest observations that I had recently was about the defunding of the police. And I'm going off topic here to talk about something else. People have been talking about defunding the police lately because they are stockpiling weapons and taking salaries and not working and things like that. I wrote a blog called War, a meta-state and a meta-race. One of the things that people don't to understand about our ethno-cops, which is our latest iteration of Ku Klux Klansmen, to the best of my knowledge, is that this meta-race or this meta-state within our countries all over the world are not only taking a salary from the government or supposed police services, but they're also exploiting the citizens for whom they claim to be providing protection. That means stealing data from their smartphones and stealing data from their businesses, and even now you can exploit a person's nervous system using cybernetics. As if that wasn't bad enough, they're also posing as civilians while hosting podcasts and doing seminars and working as entrepreneurs. As if that wasn't bad enough, they expect to be above the law, and they don't expect to do any time for any felonies. As if that wasn't bad enough, because of their historical background, of their parents or grandparents, they're inheriting this quasi-religion of imperialism, which says that I can take slaves, I can take concubines, I can stalk other people, I can assault other people, and mistreat them, and I'm not doing anything wrong because might makes right, or I'm the boss, and that's how I show people who the boss is, and everybody needs a boss. The fact of the matter is, people don't need a boss whatsoever. In fact, it's gentrification that's in your future, not differentiation. Okay, you guys, that is going to wrap it up for this week's video cast. I hope you liked it and got something to think about as well as something to act on. Before I let you go, I'm going to give you a tip because I know you're a visitor to the website because you want ideas that you can use in the marketplace. And that's what Sovromano was originally created for. However, some of these talks will give you a purpose that you can apply them to. That way you're not just learning different techniques or heuristics, but you actually have a purpose to use them for. So if you have a pen and a piece of paper, I'm going to give you something that you can use now and take with you. It's called the 3S technique. 3 S's. The first one stands for shape, the second one stands for survive, and the third one stands for synchronize. Shape, survive, synchronize. Depending on your situation and your environment and where you are, you'll be doing one of these three things, or you'll be leaning on one of these three things, probably more than the other. When you're shaping things, that means you're in an activity that's high activity. That means you're selling, you're scoring points, you're building relationships, and you're very aggressively harvesting and working. When you're surviving, that means you're playing the long game. That means you're hibernating like a polar bear. It means you're trying to conserve calories, and it means you're trying to wait it out. When you're synchronizing, that's when you're trying to blend in with other people. That means you're learning your way around, you're learning the customs, you're learning who the players are, you're learning the dynamics, the economics, and the sociologies of the environment, and you're trying to make new friends, or maybe you're trying to make new acquaintances. Shape, survive, synchronize. So I'll give you a quick example from history, and that is from Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great had a great record with invading other lands, and while colonizing places like Italy, Turkey, North Africa, and Spain, his approach to maintaining order in those lands was by way of the third S, synchronize. He encourages men to intermarry with population, and he encourages men to adopt their customs and religions, and he also encouraged no mistreatment of the population that they had invaded. Because of that, they were able to spread Greek civilization all over the world. That's a little bit different from the imperialism that came after him, which did not believe in synchronizing. They believed in differentiating and sought to create a hierarchical society, which is what we know of today as the Ku Klux Klan or some other organizations that put their heritage or their land above the land that they have conquered or the race that they have conquered. That's an old heuristic, but it doesn't work anymore, and it's not based on science anyway. All right, you guys, that is going to wrap it up for this edition of our video cast. I hope you enjoyed it. What do you think? Was the 18th century worth it or not? Obviously, it's going to depend on who you are and where you are and at which point in time you are. But it is something to think about. Thank you for your support. I do need your help. If you want to make a donation, you can go to paypal.me/Sovromano, or you can sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Sovromano. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
I need to talk to you. What is this, Nina?
Vaccinations.
What do you mean vaccinations? We weren't given vaccinations.
Or? Look at this.
Hey, what's your name?
My name?
Hey. I'm sorry about your dad.
My dad?
All right, I'll see you back at base.
Yep.
This is not a humanitarian mission. We're not saving kids, we're stealing them.
This is what we do. Now you know. David takes them out from here, wipes their memories with the gas, and raises them in the bureau.
If you take away what they know, then you take away who they are.
Yeah.
I think that's the point.